Welcome to this episode of Productive Passions. Today we're diving into a topic that touches countless relationships, from boardrooms to living rooms, narcissistic personality patterns and their impact on our lives. Whether you've encountered these behaviors in a boss, a colleague, or a personal relationship, understanding the subtle signs and proven strategies for protecting yourself can make all the difference. In this episode, we'll break down the clinical understanding of narcissistic behaviors, explore the predictable stages of narcissistic relationships, and most importantly, discuss practical, evidence-based strategies for maintaining your well-being when dealing with these challenging dynamics. We'll hear from mental health expert Eamon McKay, who specializes in narcissistic abuse recovery. What makes this conversation particularly crucial is that narcissistic behaviors often hide in plain sight, masquerading as charisma, confidence, or even tough love. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer understanding of these patterns and, more importantly, a toolkit for protecting your peace and productivity. Stay with us. This is a conversation that could transform how you navigate challenging relationships in both your personal and professional life. Today, my guest is Eamon McKay, a licensed marriage and family therapist with over 20 years of clinical experience and 4 years working with narcissistic personalities. Eamon, welcome to the podcast and thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure to be here, Christy. Thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to start out with understanding the misconceptions about narcissism, where you hear about it all the time. Can you tell me what narcissism is not?
Absolutely. Certainly in the social spheres, the word narcissism and narcissist have become very commonly used recently, pretty much for anybody whom you might find disagreeable, or someone who might show a haughty attitude, or someone who might be confident, for instance. But that's not necessarily narcissism. Narcissism is not confidence. Okay. A lot of people are confident. They can stand on a stage and perform or lecture, or even overconfidence is not narcissism. Even if you're overly confident in some of your skills, it's not necessarily being boastful or bragging either. Certainly that can be a component part of it. There are those amongst us who have special talents, for instance. They're the ones giving the TED Talks. They're the ones, authoring books. They're the ones who are, capable of being seen as authorities on things, not just by themselves, but others also. Those people may just have a special talent and they're capable of using that talent well, performing it well, vocalizing their talents well and their insights well. And it, that can often be mistaken for narcissism. But it's not usually. And oftentimes, most of the time, whenever we are, in a quarrel with someone and they don't agree with us, that's not necessarily narcissism, either the personality disorder or even a trait.
No matter how much we might want to accuse them of being narcissistic or a personality disorder, that opinion isn't enough to make it so.
That's correct. There are people that can show various traits of narcissistic personality disorder. And in order to be diagnosed with it, there are 9 criteria by which the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual will suggest you diagnose folks. And you have to have 5 of those 9 criteria. Now that's expanding a lot. The DSM is very limited in its understanding of narcissism. And since the DSM was published in 2013, the DSM-5 was published in 2013, research into the various types of narcissism really don't fit necessarily the diagnostic criteria in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Okay. In simplest terms, what is narcissism?
The personality disorder itself is a mental health condition or disorder in which people have an unreasonably high sense of their own importance. They will, because of their sense of specialness, they will expect to be treated more fairly than others. They will expect to have special treatment. They will expect to be deferred to. They will expect that others will comply with their wishes. At its core, it's a personality disorder in which people perceive themselves as special and expect others to treat them as such.
And other than feeling special and expecting that treatment, there's a good bit of manipulation that goes on. Is that correct?
That's correct. A couple of the more prominent traits within narcissism are antagonism, manipulation, and entitlement. And most, if not all, subtypes of narcissistic personality disorder, the individual will be a very skilled manipulator, whether that is in workplace settings, in relationship settings. They can have a tendency to persuade people to their way of seeing the world. They can gather what are known as flying monkeys.
What is the term?
Flying monkeys.
Flying monkeys. They can gather flying monkeys. And okay, and that means? If
you have a narcissistic traits or certainly narcissistic personality disorder, what you will do, particularly if you are in a relationship with someone and particularly with covert narcissism or vulnerable narcissism, your flying monkeys are those individuals whom you gather around you who almost spy on that other person or can manipulate that other person or can continue to be friendly with that other person, but they feed information back to the narcissistic individual, to that abusive partner. Have you ever seen the movie The Wizard of Oz? But apparently what the flying monkeys in the movie do is they go out and they come back and they provide information, and they are the eyes and the ears seemingly of the controlling force in the movie, or the kind of malevolent force in the movie. And so that's the term that's been adopted for individuals. Oftentimes they are, mutual friends, for instance, that the covert narcissist or the narcissist in general will manipulate that individual and have them be their eyes and ears on the survivor of the relationship, on the abused party, so they can gather information on that individual or even influence that other survivor party. And I've also seen instances in which the flying monkeys have threatened the survivor within the relationship.
Can you give us an example? I know we're using The Wizard of Oz and flying monkeys, but in a real life relationship, what might that look like?
That could be someone who is a mutual friend of you and your abuser. And that individual is either pretending to be or still is a friend of yours, but because of their connection with the abusive party, the narcissistic party, they are sharing your mindset, your thoughts, your intentions regarding the relationship, or your concerns regarding the relationship with the abusive party. Okay, so they are this conduit of information that oftentimes is not unconscious. Sometimes it can be unconscious. The person doesn't even know that they are being the flying monkey.
I was going to ask that if they're aware of that. So sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And I've seen it in multiple ways where the individual knows that they are feeding information back and are doing so willingly to stay on the good side of the narcissist. But I've also seen it where they don't realize that they're feeding information back to the other party. Okay. They are being used and they don't even know it.
So are all narcissists bad, or have they developed these traits as a result of some emotional wound? And is there room for compassion? Is that appropriate for a narcissist?
Are all narcissists bad? It's a very interesting question. It is a narcissistic personality disorder is a personality disorder. So if you want to define that as something bad, you certainly can. Narcissists can have a very positive impact. Many CEOs, for instance, are narcissists because they can take really difficult decisions almost without being empathic at all with the ramifications of those decisions. Okay. So A CEO might make difficult decisions that someone who is more empathic may not. Okay. Now that's going to benefit the business. That might benefit the customer, for instance. That might even benefit the workforce if they're getting rid of, say, someone who is not pulling their weight. Okay. Someone who's not being effective. It's not impossible also that narcissists can be effective parents. One of the things about narcissism is they are very restricted in the way that they display empathy and experience empathy. And yes, because of that, they can make the harder decisions that many more soft-hearted individuals may not make. So yes, could there be benefits in a business environment? Absolutely. A lot of CEOs, for instance, are also bad losers. So they will fight. They will be the ones who will be in the room after everybody has gone home. They're still at their desk. They don't want to lose. Narcissism can power that also. And many narcissists, as well as being manipulative, have a huge amount of charisma. They can be very persuasive. They can look very good in interviews. They can persuade people to go above and beyond their 9-to-5 job. And that gets results. So yes, narcissism does have its benefits. Absolutely.
So you almost have me convinced that if I'm starting a company, I might want to look for somebody with narcissistic traits. What's the downside to that?
They can dominate. Okay. They have a tendency to dominate individuals. They can bully individuals in a very subtle way to go past their, say, 9-to-5 or their 9-to-6. They can persuade them to stay on. They can promise the world, but the world might never come for that individual. Okay. They can very much, one of the things about narcissistic individuals is that they're very averse to criticism. So if they get criticized by anybody, say in a newspaper article, for instance, or a magazine article or a podcast, they might blow up, and they won't see themselves as being at fault. They will say, we're not working hard enough. The team has to do more. The business has to be more productive because people are criticizing us and it's got nothing to do with me.
So
Okay.
If I'm working for that narcissistic CEO who says you need to work 12, 14, 18 hours a day because that shows me you're working hard, how do you interact with that person? Because this is the person who can fire you. And if you're not able or wanting to walk away at that point, how do you negotiate that relationship to make it bearable, tolerable to stay there?
So there's a need, if you think that your boss or your manager is narcissistic in some way. Again, as we talked about at the top of the hour, they aren't necessarily narcissists, okay? They might just have high expectations, and those high expectations might come across in bullying type behaviors, okay? Or manipulative type behaviors. One of the things to do is, is know what the traits of narcissism are.
Okay, let's talk about those.
Okay, so the traits of narcissism are, if we go with the current DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual version.
And the DSM is what clinicians use to make a diagnosis, correct? You have to meet this many criteria to be able to diagnose somebody with this disorder, this mental health disorder. Is that correct?
That's correct. So most therapists will go by the DSM. Increasingly, there is another diagnostic tool coming in. It's called the International Classification of Diseases, or the ICD. I think it's on version 10 or 11 right now. Mm-hmm. And the ICD-10 diagnoses narcissism very different to what the DSM does. And I'm not totally okay with it. Yeah, it's a very different way, but I wish I had more knowledge of it. But I work in the United States and we use the DSM. So there are 9 traits in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Having a grandiose sense of self or of self-importance, such as exaggerating achievements and talents, expecting to be recognized as superior without the commensurate achievements. That's 1. 2, preoccupation with fantasies of success, power, beauty, and idealization. 3, belief in being special and that they can only be understood by or associated with high status people or institutions. 4, demanding excessive admiration. again, with a commensurate reason for that. 5, what I mentioned earlier, that sense of entitlement. 6, exploitation behaviors, being exploitative of others. 7, lack of empathy. I mentioned earlier on that narcissists experience and show empathy different than you, I, or anyone else who doesn't have the personality disorder. Envy towards others is 8, or belief that others are envious of them. And the last one is arrogant, haughty behaviors and attitudes. And you have to have 5 of those 9.
Okay.
So in order to diagnose someone as a therapist, it can take a few sessions, because they don't always show up in the same session. They might be thematic rather than stated bluntly in the session, like I exploit others. We might find that person has been couch surfing off others for the last 6 months, but they don't explicitly say, I exploit these kind individuals. We get that sense of this person is exploiting these individuals. So it's a very kind of, you got to kind of sense this out in a lot of ways. And certainly with the multiple ways or multiple subtypes of narcissism, they also present in very different ways.
Okay, let me go back to a million questions for you now. Let me go back to the boss who's a narcissist, and I've got to show up to work every day. What can I do if I can't, I'm not going to change their behavior. So what can I do to sort of insulate myself or protect myself to be able to do my job and have as little impact from those manipulative or abusive behaviors?
So there are a few things to do. First off, as I mentioned, certainly not everybody who is arrogant and manipulative in a workplace environment is a narcissist. But hypothetically, say that you're aware that this is the case. First thing would be to document everything. Okay. Document everything that has been asked of you and your response to it. Okay. Keep all communications very clear. Keep everything short, brief, easily understood. Okay. Boundaries are really one of the only tools in the workplace environment that you can impose. And even that, for many people, they're difficult to impose because you don't want to annoy that person. You don't want to have them find reason to fire you. But you do have the ability, limited as it may be, to impose boundaries on, say, time, on, say, duties, on, say, expectations over and above what's within your job remit. But if you're going to challenge it, again, it comes back to documenting everything. But the biggest tool that you have, the most powerful tool that you have, is the imposition of boundaries, because those can be either spoken or unspoken. And with those, you're setting what you feel comfortable with and what you're not going to feel comfortable with. At that point, if you're pushed too far, those boundaries are either too malleable because you've kept them too malleable, or they're just not adhered to whatsoever by the other party. You can then challenge that. But again, the overarching thing for many people in a workplace environment is, I don't want to annoy this person. I can't have this person fire me. So many people feel trapped in a narcissistically abusive relationship with a boss or a manager.
That makes sense to me. So if I feel like I'm in that position, then really, like you said, documenting things, but my options are to be very clear, probably not to talk a lot, not to do a lot of explaining, because that just gives more opportunity for rebuttal and arguing and that sort of thing. And setting those boundaries so that if I have to come back and have a conversation because you've asked me to stay until 10 o'clock at night, and it's because somebody was out sick and I need to do their job. And not that I'm not saying that we don't go and help out and chip in when things are down, but if it's constant abuse in terms of asking for a lot of time, asking for more work than what your job duties are, then you can go back and say, we had this conversation 6 months ago that I need to be sure that on a regular basis, not an exception, but on a regular basis, I'm not exceeding X number of hours. I'm not taking on additional responsibilities permanently unless there's whatever that is, to be able to come back and say that. I imagine that's a really hard conversation to have, especially with somebody who is manipulative. But it sounds like that's really our own recourse when we're working with somebody with narcissistic personality.
That's correct. The main points are to document what you've agreed to, document what you will do, as you said, so that you can refer to it 6 months later and go, this is what you and I suggested. You also said you don't want to say too much. There's a quote within the kind of narcissistic abuse community, and it's silence can never be misquoted. If you're silent about something, they can't say that you said something different. Okay. If you have something in writing, it's in writing. It's in black and white. You don't have to say anything else about that. You don't have to go over and above that. That is known. That is understood. Other recourses, of course, are you could go to HR. That, for many people, is both a frightening possibility and oftentimes fruitless. It becomes a he said, she said type of scenario, and nothing gets resolved. At the end of the day, though, and I quote Sandra Brown here of the Institute of Relational Harm Reduction, and she has written and stated in many of her trainings that a relationship with a narcissist is, quote unquote, a relationship of inevitable harm. You are going to get harmed in that relationship one way or another. Either you're going to lose a sense of perspective. You might lose your sense of self-esteem in a workplace environment. You might lose some confidence if you're constantly being criticized. So one of the things that you have at your disposal, which can't be interfered with by the narcissist, is therapy. If you are in a relationship with a narcissistic individual in whichever domain, whether it's work, in your personal life, you can go to therapy. You would need to find someone who is specifically trained to work with narcissistically abused individuals, because it's a very different skill set. Most therapists aren't trained in that. But any narcissist and anyone in a relationship with a narcissist in any context, they are going to be harmed one way or the other.
So let's talk about interpersonal relationships. We talk about work because this is a podcast about work and productive passions, that sort of thing. But also we all have personal relationships, whether a significant other or another family member, child, whoever. So my guess is there's maybe more options with the personal relationships and how to respond to that. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about personal relationships with a narcissist.
So the personal relationships with a narcissist, there are really about 5 stages of a narcissistically abusive relationship, and the abuse gets worse over the 5 stages. The first stage is love bombing. That is that stage where that person is highly into you. You're idealized. You are beautiful. You can do no wrong. Okay. Now, what that does is that brings you closer to that individual. It makes you feel special. That person will actually tell you that you're special, that it's a fate that we are brought together. Okay. Then comes the de-idealization phase, where you will start to be criticized. Okay? And you will start to be devalued in many ways. And then over time, your self-esteem erodes, your self-confidence erodes. You're constantly criticized for, well, pretty much everything. You can't do anything right. And that person will flag that. Okay. Then there comes what's known as the discard phase. And the discard phase is, you are gone. That person has tired of you. You no longer give them what's known as narcissistic supply. You're supplying them with the love that they need. So because you're no longer giving them what they need, they will quite literally discard you. In many relationships, you're just got rid of. No discussion. That person's just gone from your life. You find out one day that you come home and the locks have changed. Okay. You're gone. That person no longer wants anything to do with you. And oftentimes there has been a transitional relationship going on in the background with many narcissists.
Okay.
And then subsequently to that, there is a stage called hoovering. And hoovering is if that narcissist in their next relationship is not getting the same supply from that new person, well, what they might do is come back and hoover up what supply they can from you. So they come back into your life again. They love bomb again. They tell you, we were great. I don't know why I let you go. Let's give it one more time. Let's give it one more chance. And that does, there are many people who, because of the devastation at the end of a narcissistically abusive relationship, financial devastation, loss of children, loss of access to friends, family, everything, they will go back into the relationship, even knowing how dangerous and how damaging to their mental health and well-being and financial bottom line that relationship was. But they will get sucked back into it.
So you're saying the victim will get sucked back in frequently because of all those things that you talked about.
Correct. Most of the time, if there is a devastating end to the relationship, or I'll say, a lot of the time, if there is a devastating end to the relationship, the person simply wants the devastation to end. They don't want to go through any more court dates over custody. They don't want to go through divorce, legal ramifications. They don't want to go through all of these horrible things that have started to happen at the end of their relationship. So here along comes that same person and they'll say, hey, listen, you know what? I know a way to bring this all to an end. Let's stop all of the custody battles. Let's stop the divorce proceedings. Let's you and I start again. Let's give it another chance. And because of that devastation, that person a lot of the times is tempted to do so, probably more so than not, they are tempted to do so. And they will go back into the relationship again, only to be discarded again. It will happen. I
feel like this is probably a moment that a lot of people are saying, oh my gosh, yes. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that the victim of that relationship is temporarily relieved of that devastation. Mm-hmm. And so it's welcome. That is a welcome condition. But again, correct me if I'm wrong, it just is an inevitable putting off of it happening again. And I think we've all seen this. Maybe some of us have been a party to this. So we've got somebody who's listening right now who goes, oh my gosh, yes. What can you do in that moment where you just want that devastation to end? The horrific people talking about you because it helps out potentially. The other side thinks it's going to help their court case. The court case itself, the expense, we got to give up our house and start all over again. How do you get through that?
So the only thing to do, if you are aware that the individual that you're in a relationship with either displays numerous narcissistic traits or has a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, the only thing that you can do is walk away. That's it. That's feels hard. Difficult, but once you walk away and you get through the harshness that comes your direction, the courts, the embarrassment, the shame of your relationship failing, that new moniker of being divorced, or separated, which a lot of people don't want to have for themselves, they eventually realize I am a great deal healthier outside of that relationship than what I was inside it. I'm no longer being criticized for everything. I couldn't get anything right in my previous relationship. I'm no longer being demeaned. I'm no longer being ridiculed. Okay? I am capable of making my own decisions. I have my own friend group now that is separate from the other person's friend group. Life does get better, but it is tricky. It is tricky. But the courage to walk away is critically important. If that person has shown narcissistic traits or has a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, they will not change. That will happen again.
Okay, say that again.
That person, if they have narcissistic personality disorder, it is a personality disorder. They will not change. The harm is going to happen again.
So when that knock comes on the door or that phone call comes at night when you're feeling hurt, vulnerable, and it is what you've wanted to hear, that loving, let's work on this. If it's truly a narcissist that you're dealing with, that's a temporary reprieve, correct?
That's them hoovering. Something has happened where the other relationship that they have gone into, or they haven't been able to find a new relationship, they are coming to you because they are saying to themselves, well, he or she gave me love, gave me affection. I could treat that person like dirt, and they would come back and they would seek forgiveness from me for being the bad person. I'm going to go back to this individual because they supplied me with what I need. Therefore, let me just pick up my cell phone here and send a quick text message and see if I can bring that person back in again.
So if you're the person receiving that and you're feeling vulnerable, if you could get in their head in that moment, what would you tell them? And what would you tell them? And then my question is, can they do it alone?
I would say, let me answer the second question first. Can they do it alone? I would say probably not. If you are in a relationship with a narcissistic individual, I would seek therapy. Therapy with a qualified individual. That's going to make you very aware of the dynamics of the relationship. What you are seeing, the manipulations, the devaluation, they're going to help you see the harm within your relationship that you probably have not been able to see, that you are blind to. That's the thing about it, is a lot of these manipulations and harms we are simply not aware of.
That makes sense.
They will help you see it. Yeah. So if they're helping you see it, and you get that text message late at night, and it's, hey, listen, let's give this one more chance. Well, it's wise to be aware of the cycles that you probably experienced for months, maybe years, maybe decades within that relationship. And know that if that person is reaching out to you, one, if your therapist has told you there's this concept of hoovering, okay, to be aware that this is potentially a hoovering attempt, but then also to say no. And to be blunt, we looked earlier at how you can control the narcissist. It's being blunt. It's saying, no, this is my boundary. Do not contact me unless it is anything to do with the children and our divorce proceedings and the custody proceedings. And there are actual apps that courts will use now that ensure that any communication between both parties is monitored. It can be accessed by the courts. Wow. You know?
Wow, that's a big change. That's probably something, because there's a lot of manipulation that goes on that nobody's aware of.
There are. So courts, a lot of custody courts there are 2 or 3 apps that actually do this for various court systems. OFW is one.
What is it called?
It's called Our Family Wizard.
Okay.
And Our Family Wizard is a system that both parents or caregivers sign up to. And any communication, say, about a child in under some kind of custody agreement has to go through that application. What it does, or what it can do, is it can do various functional things like payments back and forth between the parents. It can handle that, for instance. But it can also look for anger. It can also look for swear words, and it can flag that. It can flag that to the court. Okay.
Very interesting. I feel like that's a whole other topic, but that's good to know. I think that's really good to know for people who are navigating a divorce and having to deal with this person who, even if it's not a narcissist, right now you're not in the best position. So that sounds like that's a really valuable tool.
Yeah, that tool is a great aspect of the separation from the narcissistic individual. But the boundaries, again, in personal relationships and intimate relationships are critical.
Let's go back to that moment. I get that text message, or you get that text message that says, I'm really sorry. This is blown up bigger than I think either one of us wanted to. Let's just get together, just you and I, and just have a conversation about it. What should that person's response be? Or what's a recommended response to that text message where it's pulling on my heartstrings and I just want this all to go away? What do I say that'll make it stop?
If you are aware in that moment that that person is a narcissist, has narcissistic personality disorder, the best thing to do is to say no. No, this is not going to happen. I am aware now of the dynamics that were harmful to me in this relationship. I am now in recovery, and I do not want you to interfere with my recovery or with my life going forward. If there is anything that you need from me regarding the children, make sure it goes through the app that the court has imposed. And you, at that point, you start to limit as much communication with that individual as you possibly can. Silence cannot be misquoted. So
I love that quote.
You stay silent. I wish I
say that again.
I can't remember who came up with that quote. Silence cannot be misquoted. And it actually is, it is it is a measure by which most individuals who have been through this adhere to. You stay quiet. There's a concept called gray rocking. And gray rocking is you become as interesting as a gray rock. That person reaches out to you and says, hey, how about you and I meet for coffee and discuss us? You can go, no, thank you. That's it. You are keeping communication polite, but insistent.
So maybe less is more?
Less is more, yeah. There is another concept, I think it's called yellow rocking, where you might say, no, thank you, but be slightly more pleasant. You might say, please give me a little bit more time if you want to reach out to me again, or please let me know whenever you want to reach out to me again. It's a little kinder, it's a little gentler. But most folks that I know go for the gray rocking, where it's no, thank you, and then they move on.
Got it.
Nothing. It's clear cut. Nothing else is said.
Okay, so I want to rewind a little bit further into a personal relationship where somebody feels like they've got a narcissist that they're dealing with. Part of the reason that we're doing this is one of my listeners said, I want to learn more about narcissism at work, narcissism in personal relationships. They said their life, pretty normal life, became extremely chaotic was the word they used, very chaotic once they got into this relationship with this person. And it was very hard to navigate their way out. So let's go back to now we're in this relationship. The newness is kind of wearing off. And, we went through, and I've been taking notes, but that first, that love, getting closer, you're such a wonderful person, that's starting to change. And now things have moved into the de-idealization. Mm-hmm. And maybe some making that person feel bad about who they are. How do you even begin the process of stopping that? Where do you start?
That one can be difficult for one reason, and it's the frog in the boiling water analogy. If you have a frog in, you put it into cooler water and you start to, boil the water, it's going to get used to it. The frog is going to die because the frog is going to boil to death. Okay. But if you were to take a frog and put it straight into boiling water, it would jump out right away. The fact is, most individuals who go into these relationships don't even realize the transition from the love bombing phase into the criticism phase, the devaluation phase, because it happens so gently, so surreptitiously, You sometimes don't even realize that you're being criticized. For instance, comments with jags, comments that sound like they are complimentary, but they have a jag to them.
Mm-hmm.
Something like, "Oh, I see you're wearing those jeans again. You look great in those jeans." Okay. But what that could possibly mean to that person is, there was one time whenever I wasn't able to get into these jeans. Okay. That word "again" in there can give that away. Okay. So there can be very subtle ways in which that person can make comments that sound complimentary, but they actually are in some way derogatory or have a malevolent intent. It is going to take time. That person will eventually realize, because the devaluation, the criticism, the undermining, the contempt will become obvious at some point. You will realize the relationship has changed. But one of the things that narcissists pick up on are people who overlook that rudeness. They will overlook that contempt that they will show to you. They'll even overlook affairs. They will overlook you having an affair, and they will come back and they will say, the survivor will come back and say, "Hey, let's try again. I forgive you for this. I'm going to work in this relationship. I hope you want to work in this relationship." And they will go back into it again. So it's oftentimes, and if you have someone who shows narcissistic traits or has narcissistic personality disorder, they will be very manipulative also. "I didn't have an affair. You're overthinking what that hotel bill that you saw. Yes, it might have 2 breakfasts on it, but I was meeting Peter for a business lunch. That's why there are 2 breakfasts on that receipt."
I laugh. It's not funny. I laugh because sadly, you hear this. Yes, that hotel room key that you found in my gym bag, that's from a trip from like years ago, and those are things that I think sometimes people look back on, they're like, yeah, duh. How did I miss that?
How did I miss this?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or why did I forgive that time after time after time, or overlook that, even if I didn't think that I was forgiving it? How did I overlook that?
That's exactly what narcissists will say to themselves. If there is a third person in the relationship, oftentimes they have overlooked things, or they've been told, and this happens so much, that they're overthinking things, that they're paranoid, that they don't love the other person or don't trust the other person, because how could you accuse me of this if you love me? So it gets turned around. It's a process called DARVO: deny, attack, and reverse the role of victim and offender. So you come to the narcissist and you say, "Hey, I see this key in your gym bag and it's got 2 names attached to it. There are 2 keys, two hotel keys. With what's going on?" That person will then go, "There's nothing going on." Then they attack. So they deny, then they attack. "You know what? You don't trust me. You've never trusted me for years. Now this has got worse." Deny, attack, you reverse the role of victim and offender. That's DARVO.
I think people who are listening to this right now who have gone through that are going, "Oh my gosh, how did you know?" So now we're in that relationship. How do you exit that? I've had conversations with people who, I'm not a counselor, but where you could see that happening. They're talking about that, and get out quickly. In fact, I have 2 daughters, and I've said, look, you can love a lot of people. This is not a Disney fairy tale where it's happily ever after because you have these feelings of love. You've got to look for signs of compatibility. But if you see these signs before you get engaged, before you move in with, before you really need to pay attention to those warning signs if they're there. So it could be to anybody. If the warning signs are there, don't wait for them to go away. Don't wait for that person to give you the really good explanation about what was happening at 2 a.m. that they couldn't get back home. look for those red flags.
That is absolutely fair. Yeah. If you're becoming aware that there are these dynamics within your relationship, well, first off, again, I will always go back to seek therapy with a qualified individual, because these relationships are inevitably harmful. You will not walk away from a relationship with any narcissist without feeling undermined, without having your self-confidence undermined, without feeling bad about your abilities in the world, you second guess yourself constantly, or you're anxious all the time, or you are perfectionistic, because guess what? That person, you never know what that person wants. So you got to know exactly what they want and get it absolutely right. If you start to realize that, that can be a long process, and it's going to end up with one stage. Either you're going to discard the abusive party, or you're going to make it so that that party, if they're not ready to discard you, they're going to discard you in a heartbeat. Because if you start to challenge a narcissist, that is the one thing that they absolutely will not tolerate, is you confronting them and showing them their weaknesses, showing them how you know of their manipulations, telling them that you're no longer going to take the BS, the nonsense that you've been accepting for years. At that point, you might find that if you're not ready to end the relationship, the narcissist will, because they hate their mask of being the perfect individual being torn away. So what you might find is that you will end up in a relationship that is going to finish almost immediately.
You haven't avoided getting in that relationship, and you're in there. We talked about boundaries, and you can have those better with personal relationships than a professional, like boss-employee relationship. What if you are in a position where the person who has narcissist is your parent, or other relationship, or a sibling that you can't easily get out of? You can't walk away. You can, but especially if you're, say, I don't know, say in high school or college, and you're dependent on this person to help you until you're independent. What can somebody do if you find yourself in that type of relationship with a narcissist?
So relationships with narcissists who are family members, they will follow exactly the same trajectory. Okay. If you have, say, parents or a parent, let's go with a parent who has narcissistic personality disorder. Well, they're going to assign roles to their children. One child will be the golden child who can do nothing wrong. One child, who is the individual who eventually goes to therapy, is the one that can do nothing right. They're the scapegoat. What I see in them whenever they come to me for treatment are things like anxiety. They're constantly anxious about what the narcissistic parent wants from them, because they can never do anything right. Therefore, they're anxious about doing everything right. As a result of that, they also become perfectionistic in every single aspect of their lives. Parent-child narcissistic dynamic is one of transaction. I will love you if you show me this admiration. You show me this amount of love. You do X. You do well in school so that I look good. You do well on your sports team so that I look good.
So you have to earn it.
You have to earn their love. You have to earn from the narcissistic parent. If you're the scapegoated child, the golden child, not a problem. They do everything right. And you're oftentimes compared to this golden child. So what ends up happening is those individuals, whenever they grow into adulthood, experience the anxiety still, the perfectionism still. They seek, there's almost this way in which they are aware that love can still be transactional. So what they do is they go over and above in their personal relationships to ensure that they continue to be loved. So they might buy their wife or their husband flowers 3 or 4 times a week, or they might do something, spontaneous just to keep that interest there, because that transaction unless you're doing something right, you're wrong. Okay. So you're constantly looking to please that individual still in your own personal intimate life. That again is, whenever those individuals come into therapy, they usually come for things like anxiety and perfectionistic tendencies and question, why am I like this? Why do I feel that nobody will love me unless I do something for them? Why can I not say no in work? Because I've still got to please these other people. I can't say no. I take on board too much because what you're looking to do is please everybody else as you please the narcissistic parent.
So really, to move out of that way of responding, you really need to get help, to seek help.
It's an understanding of, well, what's behind the perfectionistic tendencies? What's behind the transactional tendencies that you're experiencing here that you continue? Why are you so anxious? When did the anxiety start? Well, I can remember, mom would come home and she would expect X to be done. And if X wasn't done exactly right, we would get no dinner, or we would be sent to our rooms, or I would be compared negatively to my golden child sister. So you take a look at all of those early dynamics and go, well, hold on a second. Have you ever thought that mom might display narcissistic traits? And a lot of the times that kind of clicks for a lot of people. They go, oh my God, this is what this is. Now, we don't diagnose the other person. We can't diagnose. Ethically, we can't diagnose the other person. Right. She's not in our room. Okay. But we can go, okay, here's something that you might want to think of. Why is it that your self-worth is based on keeping other people happy? Why is it that your self-worth is in making sure that everything about that every way in which you serve other people is perfect? It's not half-assed in any way. It's perfect. Why is that?
So I want to go back to something we touched on just briefly earlier. I want to look at it from the narcissist point of view, or look at the narcissist. Mm-hmm. Did something happen to them to make them narcissist, or it's just the way their brain works, or could it be both?
It is.
I'm looking for that compassion angle. Should we be compassionate? I don't mean compassionate or mean. I just mean, is there something that might have happened in that narcissist's life to make them almost overcompensate? Like, I'm bigger and better than everybody else in the room.
In many ways, yes. What you've just mentioned, Christy, yes, there are those dynamics are all in there. The reasons why people develop personality disorders is still the subject of much research. For narcissistic personality disorder, sure, there's neurobiological research into, the ways in which the brain develops and, how does that manifest as behavior and attitude later on in life. There are understandings more so about how the child is brought up. On the one hand, a researcher will say, well, it's an uninvolved parent. So the child has to think of themselves as special in some way. They've got to boost themselves up because the uninvolved parent isn't giving them what they need as far as confidence is concerned. There's nobody there to build them up. On the other hand, research also would indicate that it can be over-involved parents telling that individual they're special. There's something about you that is amazing. You're always going to be a winner. Okay. We're always going to be here for you. You should expect the best from other people, and people should always give you their best. There's the amount of research into all of these facets is incredible, but there's no one definitive understanding as to why that person has developed narcissistic personality disorder. But your question about should we be compassionate to them? Sure, there are some individuals who struggle with this. They know there's a concept called the self-aware narcissist. They know that they show narcissistic tendencies, sometimes they can be troubled by them to a degree, not in the same way that you and I might be troubled about a behavior that we engage in, but they feel uncomfortable with sometimes the way that they operate in the world. And they will come into therapy, usually if something kind of catastrophic has happened in their lives, where their mask has slipped. They're not being seen as perfect, where they are seen as being weaker than what they have ever portrayed themselves to be, and undermined in some way. That's whenever they come into therapy. They're still individuals in therapy. They still get the same respect. They still get the same quality of work. We treat them as someone who is seeking help.
Mm-hmm.
Most narcissists, those with narcissistic personality disorder or show extreme traits of narcissism, they don't stay in therapy. That's the thing. They don't stay in therapy. They will move on pretty quickly, because at the core of narcissism is the world is wrong. Everybody else is wrong. It's not me.
How can people keep up with you and the writing that you are doing and have done?
For the book itself, for the book on growing up in the north of Ireland, the website for the book is thevaticanofthehollies.com. That's Hollies, HOLLIES.com. And that's where I put developments as far as the book is concerned. I put up brief excerpts of the book on there. Some media hits that I've done. I've spoken in New York at a couple of events. I
was able to watch a few of those, by the way, which I would recommend. I'll put in the show notes if people want to find that, your website. And I really enjoyed, I listened to you read some of the excerpts.
You did.
And I think I found that on the website. And I read some of them from the website. And I got to say, your writing is very good. It's very intriguing and really pulls you in, where you find you're like, oh my gosh, how is this going to turn out? Because I read the one where you were at a pub, I think, and you went into the restroom and somebody walked in, and with that fear of is it okay that I'm Catholic here, or am I going to end up dead in the back? Like that was scary to read. So that's
an excerpt called The Dam Buster. And, that's just gone up, but that's the way you live in the north of Ireland. You live with risk. You live, particularly if you're,
even to this day,
you could still be harmed. If you say the wrong thing to the wrong person in the north of Ireland, still, you could find yourself in a very, very difficult situation. Certainly, you will be physically harmed, if not killed, even today. So yep. It sounds like you have a lot of experiences, a lot of, I would say, traumatic experiences in your life. Is that what led you to be a counselor for other people? I would say partly. Growing up in the north of Ireland, I've always been someone very, very interested in the lives of other people, how they came to be who they are.
Yep.
And whenever I was in the north, whenever I was still living there, and I was in my kind of early 20s, I actually wanted to go to college for journalism, actually, but I couldn't do that full time. But eventually, several years later, I went into another field. And part of that field was some training. It was a management training, and part of it was on people in organizations, and it looked at things like employee assistance programs, things that could help others within organizations. And I got very interested in that, and went from there to college in Belfast, and studied psychotherapy. That's where so that was like 1997, 98, whenever I first studied. Then I went into the Northern Ireland Prison Service and worked with the prison guards in the prison service. So growing up in the north of Ireland, you can't avoid trauma. You can't avoid terror, certainly during those times whenever the Civil War was happening. So I kind of saw trauma, paramilitary terrorist trauma firsthand. And that really, intrigued me. So I've been a therapist ever since I came to the United States 2003 and retrained as a psychotherapist here.
You have an email address, and I'll put that in the show notes as well, where if somebody wanted to reach out to you and talk to you more specifically about narcissism or the other work that you've done, they can reach you at that email address. Like I said, I'll put that in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like in your life you've had a lot of struggles that obviously were painful, but that may have led you to be able to be the psychotherapist that you are today and have an empathy for people who have gone through some of those things that you have lived through. Do you think that that's shaped your career or even shaped your decision to choose this line of work?
Trauma specifically, in its multiple forms, whether that is physical abuse, emotional abuse, car accidents, whatever. That's always been an interest of mine and a specialty of mine. So I've specialized in that, in trauma specifically. But yeah, there are certain things that have helped me. I love to write. One of the things that I always have done is to write. And one therapist that I worked with previously, most therapists have a therapist. One therapist I worked with previously, she said, you did your own therapy, you did your own narrative therapy, particularly with your experiences in the north of Ireland, where for years you crafted a book that looked at the traumas intimately. And that is true. I mean, I looked at the traumas, I looked at the reasons for the traumas, the background to those traumas. But, for years and sculpted a piece of art out of them, which is now with, agents somewhere else. That was very therapeutic. I found that to be very therapeutic. But the other thing that I found to be very therapeutic was two things. I wanted to document it. I wanted to document what happened to me in my relationship. And I've done that both with pieces to camera. I've done that with writings on Substack. I'm going to write. I'm in the midst of writing that second book about the experiences, which I will again seek to publish. It's not just going to be here's what happened to me. It's going to be here's how I got through. Here's what I did that helped me navigate this. And I think that's the important part here is
right.
Taking the growth from it, because I'm not going to be someone's victim. I'm a survivor of abuse, but I'm not going to be somebody's victim. And I'm going to make this work for me.
In doing so, you'll also help other people. I think that's particularly important for men, because I think fewer men seek mental health care than women do. And so by putting this out there and how you've dealt with that, you may be able to help other men who have gone through similar situations. Gosh, I feel like there are so many things that we can talk about, and we may have to do this. We may have to do this again, but it's important. Number one, like I said, somebody had reached out and said, this is an important thing that I need to hear about. And I'd like for you to do an episode about that, number one. And number two, I feel like in our lives, everyone, if you're not a narcissist, at some point in your life, you're going to come across a narcissist. And, having the tools to know how to navigate that relationship, how to set boundaries, what kind of boundaries to set, that's really important to stay out of the chaos. Or once you've discovered that's where you are, to sort of remove yourself from that chaos and understanding reasoning is not reasonable with a narcissist. Is that fair?
That is correct. It is maybe temporarily so, but a lot of the times even that will be used. It'll be manipulated. The person will come across. It can and will
be used against you.
It can and will be used against you. They will come across as accommodating, but it's to get their ends met. It's not about you and them seeking to ease your plight or your difficulties. They're going to go, okay, well, let me see how I can use this. It's even with empathy. They don't experience, as I mentioned, they don't experience empathy the same way that we do. They experience empathy in a way that I understand now that this person is feeling sorrowful or guilty or sad. Well, which way can I use that? Which way can I use that? Whereas for most of us, whenever we see someone feeling sad or grieved or feeling embarrassed, we try to help them in some way. We try to support them in some way. The narcissist will say, that's interesting.
Let me tuck that back here.
Let me file this back here for my later use. Yeah. It's a very different way to experience empathy.
It's a scary thing to navigate, but thank you so much for giving us some of the tools and things to think about and things to look for if we find ourselves in that situation where we're dealing with a narcissist. Thank you so
for the
much
opportunity
for your
of being able to speak about it. It's been a great experience, and I'm happy to speak with anybody if they want to follow up. I will happily make myself available to anybody who wants to, know a little bit more about it. I'm more than happy to work with anybody if it comes to illuminating this particularly horrific form of abuse.
Thank you for tuning into Productive Passions. If you enjoy exploring ways to turn your passion into purpose, head over to our website at www.productivepassions.com to join our thriving community. Sign up for our email list and you'll get exclusive behind-the-scenes content, early access to future episodes, and actionable tips that didn't make it into the show. Plus, you'll be the first to know when we have exciting new guests and special episodes coming up. That's productivepassions.com, where passion meets productivity. Until next time.